There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
How do you know if it's real if you're not even sure that it's there? I fall down to my knees. Eyes are raised to the sky.
So Kyle, let me ask you this question. What is the worst ice-breaking question you've ever heard? On a first date or in a new group of people?
I know, I wish I had a better question. I've always loathed the question of, what do you do?
Yeah.
A, it's so open and broad that it's hard for me to actually pinpoint an answer. B, I also just hate talking about what people do for work, because it's I don't really care what you do for work.
And what does that really
Literally,
say about
unless
them?
you are this person that I met the other day who goes to people's houses to collect dead bodies. No one cares. Literally no one cares about what you do for work.
Right, and what does it actually speak about who that person is? So I propose a much better ice-breaking question.
Okay.
What's
your favorite bridge? No. Okay, sorry. What were you going to say?
What is your favorite story?
Oh, yeah, that's a pretty cool one. Well, there's always that could be open up a whole big conversation, because that could be a true story.
Sure.
That could be a book. That could be a movie. That could be whatever you want to define as story.
Right. And last episode, we talked about how stories speak to something deep inside of us and how they point to a grander narrative that maybe we organize our lives and our assumptions around.
Sure.
And so if we have a favorite story, then how fascinating would it be to pull that apart and find out what that actually says about us?
I feel like you're leading me somewhere, Daniel.
Well, what is your favorite film?
My favorite film, usually what my go-to answer is Jaws.
Right.
Jaws is normally what I consider to be my favorite film. I've seen it multiple different times. There's a lot of things that I relate to in it.
Right.
And I just think it's a great use of, just a general arc through multiple different characters through that film.
I'd love to have something smart to say, but I have never seen Jaws, so I can't say that.
Philistine.
I know. How do you feel about fixing that situation?
Let's go watch it.
Okay, let's watch Jaws. First time I watched Jaws, and let's talk after about what that means about you. And then we'll talk about my favorite story.
Cool. There we go. We just finished watching Jaws. Mine for probably the 7th or 8th time here. Yours for the first time. What did you think?
Well, that was a great film. I enjoyed that. Yeah, it was well told.
I wasn't lying to you.
It was well told. It set everything up really nicely. There was great characters, great conflict. It was interesting how the second half of the film, the boat whole sequence, it was almost like a different film. Even the way they didn't resolve the whole mayor sequence, they just leave that. It becomes hero versus outsiders to hero versus fish.
You're right in that it is kind of like two films kind of put into one. There is kind of the stuff that's on the mainland, and then when they get out into the water, it's them really battling against the shark, the monster that's coming at them. I don't know if you really need to go back and tie up all of those loose ends. In fact, I think that I respect stories that don't necessarily have to tie up every single little thing.
Oh, totally.
Do the major ones,
Yeah.
but the little ones, it doesn't really matter.
Leave that to imagination.
In and of themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so why do you like it? Why is that your favorite film story?
I think I will say that part of it is probably nostalgia, which is kind of the enemy to good storytelling in some ways, I think. So I saw it at an impressionable age, but it takes, I think let me go back. The specific reason that I still love it is the Brody character in particular. Here's this guy who's like, I was in this big city in New York as this policeman, and I wasn't making a difference, and I wanted to make a difference in a community or in a world. And he said, instead of like just doing the same sort of arrests again and again, let me move to this small little New England town so I can actually make a difference. I can feel like I'm valued. That's how he was getting meaning out of his life.
Okay.
And then he gets he's fronted with this thing, for lack of a better word, these shark attacks where he's now thrusting like it's out of his control.
Yeah.
It's very hard for him to actually enact the change that he wants.
Yeah, even with the community.
Because of the bureaucracy, because of the community. There's that moment. Have you ever seen
Outsider bit. There's that conversation right he overhears of, you're not an islander unless you were born here.
Have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
Yes.
So,
no, I haven't.
You have not seen. Okay, well, It's a Wonderful Life has another similar scene where there's a person. Mr. Potter, the villain of the movie, steals this money and he's never brought into task for it, so it never is resolved. And there's this other moment that's kind of similar, I find, in this movie, where the mother of the boy who gets killed comes and slaps Chief Brody, and I always feel like, but he has reasons, like, and he never stands up and says, "This is why I did it." But I respect him for not. It's like, no, she's absolutely 100% right to feel the way she does. Yes, there might have been ways that she's wrong in her outlook, but really at the end of the day, nothing I'm going to say is going to bring her kid back. And so I'm just going to let her have this moment. And he allows her to do that, which I kind of respect. So I find that quiet stoicism of his. There's even another moment where they're exchanging kind of war stories or the scars that all of them have. And Brody actually lifts up his shirt and there's a big scar and stuff, and they never say what that is, or they never really.
He doesn't even bring it to it. He notices it. It's almost like the character notices it, but he doesn't let the others.
Yeah, he's about to say it, and he's like, "No, I'm going to let them have their moment. This is not my time to step in." And I think for me specifically, I've always kind of seen myself as that. Is that I'm not usually the one that really likes to be jump out and like, "Hey, look at me! This is all the cool stuff I do," or "This is why I'm."
You're a cool guy, Kyle.
Yeah. I'll leave other people to decide that or not. And he decides instead, no, I'm going to let other people have their moments and have their connections, and I can be on the outside and only bring myself into it when I absolutely need to. It's not like he's a shrinking violet, but it's like, no, like this is not the time for me to interject at this point.
So he's coming in. He's making a difference in the long run. He does make a difference. He's also confronting something.
Yeah.
That's it's interesting. We're going to talk about horror films later on in this podcast, and it's interesting
Another
how this
episode.
another episode. This takes the horror film, the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
But it's a fear that they conquer by human ingenuity. And I thought it was interesting how the two accomplices to the main character, you have the scientist, the nerdy scientist, weathered but nerdy, and then you have the man that is the outsider that kind of is going to do it himself.
And the third guy, the working class guy, the person who is like works with his hands, he's out there as a fisherman.
The
that's
weathered
his day job,
seasoned.
as Quint. And
Yes, Quint, yeah.
You need that third person there to kind of make that whole triumvirate work.
Right. And I was asking myself as I'm watching this, are they going to kill the shark? Are they going to is human ingenuity going to defeat the unknown of nature? And which character is going to do it? Is it going to be the scientist that's going to do it, or is it going to be the seasoned character that takes it on? And in the end, of course, spoiler alert, but it is the main character, and he does it by a very ingenious. What am I trying to say? Ingenuity.
Oh, he's doing it with ingenuity.
Yeah, he's doing it with ingenuity, and the seasoned character is the one that is gone, and the scientist remains. Do you notice? Is that anything of that speaking to you?
Oh, I don't know. I maybe have to think a little bit longer to figure out if that's true. What Brody's able to do though is he's able to take the so-called like street smarts of Quint, but also bring in the education of Hooper to his advantage. He actually combines those two, where it's like he remembers that this is explosive. This is going. the tank that goes into the shark's mouth. That's the science coming in. But really, at the end of the day, it's him shooting it. Like
It's him shooting it down the mouth.
Right. It's Quint's gun that he uses to shoot the shark with. So it's kind of binding those two worldviews kind of together.
Interesting.
Smack dab.
Interesting. So both the ingenuity, but in the end, it is still humanity winning by the strength of their
coming together, right? This is them coming together, and even though there's a little bit of antagonism, they're still open to each other.
Right.
One of my favorite parts of the movie is them just telling stories to one another while
Getting to know
they're
each other.
bobbing in the ocean. It's one of the few actual nighttime scenes versus like at the beginning. There's a short little one in the middle, and there's that one when they're in the ocean telling stories. Whereas most of the horror actually happens in the daytime.
Yeah.
It's a very Hitchcock thing to do, by the way. But the part that I love is him telling that story about the USS Indianapolis, which, by the way, is an absolutely true story that actually happened in World War II. And they did not declassify that until after Jaws came out.
Really?
So Spielberg didn't even know that was a true story that he was telling, because Robert Shaw knew about that story from serving in World War II.
So, going back to last episode, we talked about how stories form a crucial part of empathy.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that in that scene, they are telling, there's these two almost antagonists, they're on the same team, but they're very much opposed to each other, the scientist and the weathered seaman. Yeah. In that scene, they're swapping stories, personal stories, almost stripping down, like exposing themselves literally in ways that people usually don't do. And because of that, they form a common bond and almost get eaten together.
Well, yeah, they're showing themselves that they are made of stories, that they're revealing a part of themselves, and that actually brings them closer together. I think it's a really good exemplification of what this podcast is trying to do.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Look at that, word Jaws.
That's right.
Let's go back to what we talked about last episode when you described your worldview and your hope as people coming together, and as the ability of man to create hope in the midst of the unknown, perhaps. So I see then certain correlations between that and this film.
Yeah. I don't think we're ever rooting for the shark to win.
No.
Or at least we're not supposed to be rooting for the shark to win.
Right.
And in fact, we're seeing that there is ways to have saved a lot more people, but through like avarice and greed and all that sort of thing, this town kind of goes down this trajectory that is against their better judgment, not better judgment, but their just overall way of life. They're valuing money over safety of people.
Right.
And so it takes Brody saying, like, no, we have to actually deal with this situation that's in front of us instead of pushing it away or thinking it's just going to magically resolve itself. We have to actually go out and change things.
Right. And by the strength of himself and his ingenuity and his friends, he's able to do that in the end.
Correct.
The unknown is defeated.
Yeah, and I think there's that hope piece that comes in.
But that hope comes from human ingenuity.
Correct.
It's not coming from the outside.
Yeah, I don't think there's any sort of like miraculous signal that's coming to him to enact these plans. This is the humanity coming together and making those changes.
Interesting. Huh. I see this tying into my favorite story.
I was going to say, let's segue then into your favorite story, which is...
Well, so I'm just going to throw it out there, and this might change over the years, but right now my favorite movie is Wes Anderson's Moonrise Kingdom.
Ugh. I'm just kidding. I knew it was going to be something Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
So why is the Moonrise Kingdom... I call it
the Moonrise Kingdom.
Why does the movie Moonrise Kingdom speak to you over some of his other work?
Well, to answer that question... Can I play you the one of the scenes from the movie?
Yeah, let's go and watch it. There is a TV like right over there.
We can do this, and I have the cartoon edition.
Sufficiently creeped out. Daniel, you win in your scary movies that we're throwing each other.
I love that scene. I had shivers down my spine watching it again.
Yeah.
But maybe that was just the Blu-ray. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's the music, that children's chorus has lightning flashes and all that blue color that Wes Anderson uses for the nighttime scenes.
Yeah.
Like a filter or something he puts over the camera lens. So you tell me then, in this case, why is it that you resonate so much with this story?
There's a lot of reasons. I think one thing I'll just throw out there that unlike, say, Lord of the Rings or novels that are specifically from a Christian, or films that are specifically from a Christian, I don't think Wes Anderson is a Christian, but I do see the redemptive themes come out very strong, and I almost like the fact that they're tucked away hidden, that I can still find them. So that's a reason that it's especially dear to me.
This happens at a church.
This happened as a church, and that climatic scene from Moonrise Kingdom is interesting because the movie, it's a very ordered world. Everything is in its right place, but it's a very broken world. There's a lot of characters that are flawed.
I was going to ask you
that made a mess.
I was going to ask you that specifically.
Okay.
Is that when you watch a Wes Anderson movie, there is a very specific order to it. It's very symmetrical. It's very creator-oriented, where it looks like he's like moving pieces around inside of a dollhouse almost. So is that partly why you think you're innately drawn to him? Is that he does give you that order of things, which I'm assuming Christianity gives to you?
Yes,
I think there's something deeper than that.
No, I think that's part of it. There is that orderedness to it, but because it's so ordered, the heartache can come out almost, I wouldn't say stronger, but it's not that it's a perfect world. It's a flawed world, but an ordered world. And I think that description, flawed but ordered, is a really good way of describing the Christian cosmos, if you would.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what else does Wes Anderson do for you then? What is it that... There's the order, I guess, to his world, but there has to be something a little bit deeper than that.
There is. Another little thing that is the humor to it is very detail-driven and character-driven. It's not in-your-face humor. It's very, you have to watch them again and again to get the little visual or character jokes that come out each time. But in this movie, I think there's a couple of things. It's the family unit is broken in that film. We have kids that the parents... the lawyer, played by Bill Murray, and who plays his wife in the film?
The wife of one of the Coen brothers,
Correct.
But I can't remember their names off the top of my head.
They're this broken couple. Susie and Sam are trying to run away from that, but in the end of the movie, running away from that community isn't the answer. In fact, what you see in this climatic Noah's Ark storm scene, it reminds me of Dorothy Sayers' novel, is this flood coming and the whole community is driven into the church. And in that crisis moment when it looks like Sam and Susie will either have to be split up or possibly die, you have, I think, that eucatastrophe that I described earlier. Catastrophe, but Euro, the good catastrophe coming together of something that just came out of the blue, this possibility that exists that uses the strengths of all the characters, including the lawyers, but they come together, and in that Hallelujah chorus, you see the two of them hanging on to that new bond of fatherhood and anchored in the church. And just that woodcut image of that happening is beautiful. And they're also, but to get there in the story, they have to realize their flaws. I love that moment when Bill Murray's staring up at the ceiling and his wife says, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself." And then they're talking about why their kids have had all these problems. And they say, well, they've got us. Just speaking of their parents. And Bill says, that's not enough. And I think that scene in that movie answers that. So yeah, it's not enough. We're not enough. We need something else. And that is apparent to us in a community.
So how do these themes then connect to your real life?
Well, they don't. I just... What do you mean?
It's completely flights of fancy. I guess what I'm really asking is that why does that specifically resonate with you as a Christian in your day-to-day life?
When you think of your film and how it's the individual...
Your film?
Yeah, your film. Jaws by Kyle. The character solves the problem on his own with the help of others, but it's still very much, it's a self, he's able to save it. In this film, I think you could argue that the answer still comes from community and from people, but there's this sense of something else happening in that story. And so in my case, personally, the realization that I am flawed and that I need outside help is something I need to be reminded of, because my tendency is to want to do it myself. And the reminder that it takes place in a community, and that it takes place in the sense of, one thing I love about the movie is how you know the events are going to happen ahead of time through the Bob Baldwin narrator character. The storm will hit the island in 3 days' time. There's a sense of it being arranged ahead of time. but coming together completely natural based on the strengths and the weaknesses and the realization of the characters.
So what you're saying is that the film that I recognize as my favorite is partly due to the fact that I identify that it is the humanity that is able to save the day, whereas that your favorite film you're identifying is one where you can see that there's the grace of a higher power ordering things
Yes.
In their everyday lives.
Yes. And
So,
but the
I am
answer,
right. I'm just kidding. Keep going.
but the answer is also rooted in community. They're not going off to the woods. You think the story's going to be get away from the community, go off in the woods, find yourselves in love, young couple, and you will save the patriarchy that's ruining itself. Whereas the answer is, well, yeah, the patriarchy is broken. The characters are broken, but they still need each other, and these events drive them to realize that, and then you have the lovely scenes taking place after that, where the village gets put back together. The families come back together, and you got this shot of the cat with the kittens, very, very symbolic.
So not to ruin, hopefully, our subsequent episodes, but I mean, I realize that as a Christian, God is the answer, is the ultimate answer, but I guess what I want to ask is, he's the only answer. Which is kind of a weird way of asking, like you just identified, yes, there is a higher power in Moonrise Kingdom, but
Right.
there has to be that community aspect there as well to help usher in the reality from
Yes.
the metaphysical, if that's
Sure,
how you want to put
sure.
it. So I guess what I'm asking is, like, which do you say it's a combination, or do you think, no, your belief comes first?
I think the belief, the answer is the belief comes first, but the belief doesn't work on its own. Very rarely in the Bible or in life, I think, do you see out of the blue things happening, but rather God uses the things that he created, the world and the people that he created in the world, to work out his salvation. And which makes sense. He's God. He's made those things. Why can't he use them? And so, yeah, but it is the same with life. Like I'm not someone who advocates going off in a monastery and sitting there on a rock by yourself for 10 years.
I am. I should just...
Okay, just clarify that. But that the answer and salvation works itself out through God working in us, but in this world that he's placed us in. And Wes Anderson does a good job of placing people in our world.
You can't ostracize yourself in order to
Yes.
enact change. You kind of have to use
That's right.
him with the
Well,
rest of
he
the
does
community.
it, right? But he does it using those things.
I see.
Right.
Yeah, just trust in yourself. That's what I say.
That's interesting. How both of those are different. Trusting yourself completely versus saying that I actually can't trust myself. And
Yeah,
after you realize that, you move on.
I think there's a bit of a similarity in that.
Yes.
I do believe in that you have to trust in yourself, but I also identify the fact that most things that you can accomplish in your life cannot be done by yourself. You do need help. And asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength in that way. When you identify, I cannot do this alone, I need you specifically to come and help me out, whether that's something as basic as like I need someone to help me move, or as something that's personal as like I need help through my mental woes, and I need to go to like a psychiatrist or a therapist of some kind to help me out, like put these things together, or a pastor to put them together so that they can help you through that journey.
I love that line in The Royal Tenenbaums, the Wes Anderson film, where Owen Wilson's character crashes. He's drugged up and crashes his car into the house, and it's kind of the climactic scene, and he lands broken, and his friend comes up to him, and Wilson's character moans, "I need help." And it's this big realization for his character, and it sums up a lot of what happens in that film. Yeah. But I think that to myself sometimes, when I'm realizing that I'm doing things on my own, and I'm trying to fix myself, I need help. I can't do this myself. And I think when you look at the personal Christian walk of faith, in order to recognize what God is doing in you and move forward, you have to realize that you can't do it yourself. In order for you to let God in, as it were, you have to realize, I can't do this myself. This is not, I'm failing. Right. And if I continue on this path, I'm just going to fail further, and I'm going to face judgment for it. And I need someone else to come in and change that. Self-help, really.
Daniel, we need a bigger boat. I think is what this comes down to.
Jiminy Cricket, he flew the coop.
That's right. What did we learn today, Daniel?
I watched Jaws for the first time.
That's good.
Not to swim in the water. I think it's interesting seeing how our two favorite films, the reason we like them, come from very different points. Mm-hmm. I think we both still admire each other's films.
Yeah.
If
If I remember correctly, I believe Moonrise Kingdom was my favorite movie that came out the year it came out.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure it was.
Pretty sure it was, yeah. Just seeing how the reasons we gravitate towards those stories do speak to our assumptions about life.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm taking away today is that I didn't even realize that until we had this conversation specifically. That's like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense why I personally like this movie and why you like that movie.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of, kismet that happens.
Kismet. The interesting thing, too, is when you think of your example, you grew up on Jaws. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Watch it every day.
Every day. But it's funny how the stories shape your perception of the world, just as you gravitate towards stories because that is your perception of the world. I wonder where those two paths pull apart. How much of your world is shaped by the films than the stories that you're told.
I want to go back even further. Like, I'm curious now that because I watched Jaws for the first time when I think I was maybe 13.
Wow.
I think it's the first time I saw it. But before then, I mean, there was definitely like TV shows and books and other stories that I was fanatical about. So as we go on, maybe we can uncover and unpack those a little bit
Childhood
more.
stories.
And see what that is.
Let us know what you think. If you want us to do an episode on childhood stories, leave us feedback.
Yeah. Well, how can they how can they find us on the internet?
How can they find us? How can they find you, Kyle?
They can find me. Probably the easiest way is to go to Twitter. I am at the Kyle Marshall. That's Marshall with 2 L's.
The Kyle Marshall.
That's right.
You used to have a really different Twitter handle, and it confused the heck out of me.
That's why
so
I changed
well done on
it.
changing
It was
it.
my 2 middle names, and no one ever could understand what it was. And
Every time I tried to find you on Twitter and tag you in something, it took too long. You can find me at my website, danielmelvilljones.com. That's Daniel, Melvill, Jones.com. Kyle, the film you chose had some pretty dark and scary elements to it that in the end were conquered. But can some of those dark and scary elements not be conquered? And why do we choose films that tackle that?
Yeah, let's delve into some ghost stories.
Let's do it. So next episode we'll be talking about horror. See you then.
That's right. I guess I should go get those bed sheets and put over myself. Assumptions is produced by Daniel Melvill Jones and Kyle Marshall. This episode edited by Kyle Marshall. The theme song used in the podcast is To the Sky, sung by the Parson Red Heads off of their album Orb Weaver. Podcast artwork designed by Chris Taniguchi. Feedback or questions can be sent to assumptionspod@gmail.com. We can also be found on both Facebook and Twitter by searching Assumptions Podcast. One last thing, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, consider rating and leaving a review on iTunes or whatever podcast service you use. It really helps us out and allows other people to hear us. And why would you deprive others of that joy? You'll hear us again in 2 weeks. Speaking of that, on the next episode of Assumptions.
These spring rolls that we got.
I don't think I've ever had these kind of spring rolls.
When I was a young kid, me and my brother snuck out one night, and I'm probably would have been around 3 or 4 years old, and the movie It was on television about clowns, those people in the storm drains, which, by the way, I've seen as an adult, and it's not good. It's a bad movie, but as a kid, it scared the crap out of me. And since that time, I've always had this love-hate relationship with horror movies.
I say clowns. I love it.
Well, that as well, but I just...
This has been Assumptions.